tātou. Each year I present a speech, I try to focus on a societal issue which troubles me. So in keeping with fashion, this year I chose to explore the concept of human communication and, more importantly, effective communication. To break this down, I intend to explore what makes this communication effective, why it's important, what are some of the troubles that impede effective communication, and some of the tools and pathways forwards that I believe may help to improve it. Our brains are bombarded with mountains of information each day. We ingest it from our phones, our friends, the barista who makes our morning coffee. We're presented with so much information that our brains find it increasingly more difficult to process it properly. This overload of information means that effective communication has become more and more important in today's society, especially in a leadership sense. What I mean by that is the ability to communicate a concept or idea in any person-to-person interaction has become a rare and vital skill in almost every aspect of our daily lives. Whether it's the relationship between parent and child, boss and employee, or even in a political or corporate environment, the basics of communication as a skill remain the same. In recent years, we've seen just how pertinent this effective communication can be with the likes of our COVID response. I wish, however, to focus my speech on the fundamentals of communication, to show how our changing lives restrict it and the implications of this. The two most basic pillars of communication are empathy and sympathy. And I believe that a large number of our troubles surrounding communication boil down to our poor understanding of these two concepts. So in short, empathy is the ability to understand the thoughts and emotions of another person, and sympathy is the actual ability to share those emotions yourself. A brief Google search will prove just how poorly we understand these topics with unclear differences and poor definitions. However, to tie this back into a leadership sense, we've seen the effect of this empathetic approach to leadership with the response to the threat of COVID-19. Without going into massive detail and debating the ins and outs of our actual response, it's quite clear that the empathetic approach to leadership displayed by Jacinda Ardern was just effective enough to convey the actual necessity and the obvious actions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. As I reach the last few weeks of my time here at TBC, people speak a lot about maturity. However, I believe that at the core of maturity lies emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and thoughts. Once we master this, we have a far better chance of achieving successful communication. My issue with this, however, is that we young people are constantly being told how to think and what to feel. This is largely through our phones. I see it myself scrolling through an Instagram Explore page or swiping through TikTok. We're bombarded with inspirational quotes or life advice from these influencers or bot accounts. The more you interact with this sort of content, the more of it you see. And this conditions our way of thinking. More and more I see peers and friends relying upon these posts and are unable to process and form these complex ideas in inner dialogue. They rely upon these posts to express themselves and their understanding of the world. Now, a strong emotional intelligence means we're able to understand the reasoning behind that inner dialogue. It helps not only to bolster our self-confidence, but it also develops our interpersonal empathy, meaning that we can communicate and relate to our peers far better. Where the effects of technology come into play here is when we're exposed to so much of this so-called inspirational material that we begin to second-guess our own inner emotions and understanding of those personal feelings. So this leads me to the second challenge I wish to talk about, the idea of intergenerational communication. Now more so than ever, we're seeing an increase in generational friction. Compared to our parents and their parents before, the friction between my generation and our parents is widened due to our disconnection. The way we communicate with people or share information is so far removed from the ways of our parents that we now struggle to understand each other. Now, I believe this boils down to the environments in which each generation was raised and their motivating factors in life. So essentially, I see three challenges that restrict effective communication in today's society. Firstly, the manipulation of our thoughts and emotions through social media and our cell phones. And again, I don't want to be too quick to slam the cell phone, as this often leads to a closing conversation, especially from my generation, as we feel blamed for the effects of mobile communication, when in reality it's almost all we've ever known. But the fact remains, if we wish to effectively communicate and find a way forward, we must find a way to balance our mobile phones and that emotional intelligence. So secondly, on that emotional intelligence note, Without each individual properly understanding the way they function, we will struggle to effectively communicate. This is why we see a rise in the number of people who suffer from things such as anxiety. Many are just not able to process that complex inner dialogue and thus react adversely to these external pressures. And you could say rightly so. And finally, this concept of intergenerational communication. The rough estimate now is that we have up to 5 generations active within our workforce. And as I said before, this poses a challenge in itself. But it also poses a challenge in a leadership sense. Younger bosses have to find a way to lead and employ and motivate their employees more senior to them, and vice versa. And that's where I see the tools of empathy being so crucial for effective leadership. So in closing, where do I see these successful pathways and tools? Well, I see them firstly in self-understanding, rather than relying upon the opinions of others to form an image of ourselves. This means we must prioritise the understanding of skills such as empathy within leadership, re-envisaging the way we understand that leadership. This understanding will help us bridge the gap between generations, strengthening our ability to function cohesively as a society. Thank you very much.